Welcome to the Chess Channel, the channel where you can learn loads. If you look at what we covered so far, over time, we covered some very important openings, we looked at some classics that really never die, and in addition to some modern games, we have looked at some of the most complex games you can find on record. We are talking about the top chess engine championship that, at times, are near impossible to cover in any great detail. It is by now a very normal approach because these monsters of an engine can look at depths we humans cannot even imagine. We will, in the near future, cover some top chess engine games, but today, we are going to look at yet another classic. As we said in our previous video, an all-round strong player should be familiar with the opening, the middle game, and of course, to round things up, the end game. Every part or stage, if you like, can be extremely tricky. If you were asked, which part is the trickiest, what would you say? Remember this, you will not go far if you are not up to speed with your opening repertoire. In our last video, we looked at Karel Traxler, the person who probably played the most complicated queen sacrifice of all time, because when he sacrificed his queen, he never needed to recover, and in addition, went on to sacrifice more material, just to be able to get there in the end. And he did, in such a phenomenal fashion. We are not moving away from Traxler. Traxler himself was not omnipotent. On a good day, he would win a game very easily, but on a rather bad day, he would lose as easily. In his last game, he made every single move count, and in today's game our task really is to check out and analyze at each and every step. Today's game was played back in 1900, and Traxler, who assumes this side, was up against Beck. Unfortunately, we do not have the exact date of the game, but we know it was played in Osykyu Lomnice in the Austrian and Hungarian state, or empire if you like. It is also unfortunate that pictures of people like Karel Traxler are unavailable, and in fact, every time Traxler is covered by YouTubers out there, you will only get to see the same picture time and time again. When it comes to his opponent, we know nothing about him other than his initial and surname. Sir Traxler this side, loved to go for some very specific openings which are also common nowadays. He started up with 1. e4, Beck answered with e5, and with the kingside knight coming out, Beck opted for a mirror image approach. It's the Petrov or the Russian if you like, but let's see what line these two are going to follow. There are too many options you can go for here. 1 is to take the pawn on e5, 2 is to go for knight c3, there is this move right into d4, and of course, in addition to all the other moves, you can also go for something like bishop c4. In this game Traxler went for the modern attack, but can anyone identify it? It was this push to the 4th. With Beck taking the pawn, Traxler is just about to grab hold of this pawn on e5, but how would you do it? Given Traxler was playing this opening, we really expected him to use the knight to ensure the e-file opens up, but this is how Traxler took d5 to protect the knight, led to the bishop to attack the knight, and this is how Beck chooses to cover. Is this a strong and solid response? If you are able to answer correctly, you will be one step ahead of so many other players. With this pawn now coming off, Beck rushed the knight back to intercept him, and right away, Traxler ensured he got his king to safety. Bishop e7 and knight c6 are very expected responses, but Beck was as aggressive as Traxler was. He pinned the knight in this way, and before Traxler attacks the bishop with h3, he first squeezes in this check. Bishop e7 resulted to the queenside knight to be developed. Beck now mimics that move with his own knight, and though h3 at some stage is coming, can you try and figure out what Traxler does? This is the move he went for. Beck was all too happy to see this move because it allowed him to tack the king away, and as soon as this move was made, Traxler went on to remove the knight. How would you take the bishop and why? There is only one correct really, but which one would it be? It has to be with the bishop. If you take with the rook, can you see what is likely to follow? If you need more time, all you need is to pause. The most important move in this position is to just take this pawn in the center of the board. You cannot take the knight, and in case you cannot see it, we will come back to this position later on. All you have here is rook f7. Go for this and this another blast on its way. Can you see it? It's this bishop repositioning, and this attack is way too powerful for anyone to hold. Coming back to this position, Beck captured using the bishop, and though Traxler himself loved to take risks in nearly every single game he played, this one was no exception. Any ideas what he did and whether it was a safe bet? This is the move he applied, but it was maybe too easy not to miss. The idea is that should the knight depart, once the bishop removes this pawn on h7 with a check, this queen in the center of the board is going to fall and you can write another point to this game. Beck of course saw this trick and avoided taking the knight. What he did instead was this. Can you fish it out before we show? He took this pawn on the second. Traxler in turn reciprocates the attack in this way, and before doing anything else, would you like to get involved here again? What is the right order and what is the most impactful? Though this bishop on b2 would need to move out unless you go for a move to protect him, a move like queen f6 for example, Beck saw fit to get rid of this knight first. Traxler knew this bishop is threatening the queen and there is no way the queen can have him removed because the rook has the bishop's back. So in this instance, the bishop was removed using the pawn. Beck in turn tries to take advantage of this move, and with him coming in with a check, how robust is this position you see here? King h1 led to this bishop to reposition here, and what Beck is looking at next is probably this pawn on f2. There is another something to consider in the meantime. It's this knight that is under threat from the very queen. With Traxler to move, he was calculating whether this knight on d5 needed to move somewhere or find another resource to protect him. Let us use some basic analytical concepts. Can you afford to take this pawn on c7? If you do, this game is basically over in just a few moves. Whatever Beck tries to do, he would not be able to recover from this position. The most powerful piece on the board right now has to be the rook in combination with the knight on c7. The most critical spot on the board is this outpost on e6, and Beck will not be able to protect it. Even if he could find a resource to cover e6, this rook in the corner is most likely to drop. So with this in mind, this was extremely easy to figure out. In the meantime, what if Traxler went for some other move, and what would you think it could be? Traxler went for far more, and that was Traxler. This was the move he decided to go for, and this very move by the rook is actually considered to be a blunder. Even though it is a blunder, Traxler could still afford to go for it because he had already created a huge gap against Beck. What is wrong with a move like queen d8? Absolutely nothing, and yet given Beck saw a knight check on the radar will pick up the queen, this was the move he opted in the end. Does knight take c7 work? It does, but there was yet another move that may be more powerful. Can you try and work it out? Traxler used the knight to attack the queen, and with Beck now repositioning the queen to this square, how do you make progress here? If you take on c7, this works a treat, but can you see why? If you need a hint, this has very little to do with the rook in the corner of the board. Rook c8 for example is going to get you done in an instance. Any ideas how? It's all about this brand new attack on a far more powerful piece than the rook. If you go on and get rid of this pawn, when this check materializes on the 7th by taking king g8 and rook h3, and you would have blown it. This is in fact not true. Even if the knight on c7 is eliminated, this incoming check will get you there. Rook cf7 for example, and the final touch would be this queen response and is instantly lights out. There is no defense against this move, and when the queen drops, the game is finished too. Coming back to this move, we can try something else. What if you were to take with the bishop and not the rook? Even if the knight drops, back off the bishop with a discovered check, and with the king now forced into g8, this is the move you need to consider next. Rook cf7 is going to do the same damage as we saw earlier. Once you launch the queen to this outpost, we have a near repetition with a difference. The mate does not stop, but it is only delayed. How? Is via this queen check. Once you take, Beck would be powerless to capture the queen because his rook is pinned, is he not? With all this in mind, let's return to where we were. After this queen move, Traxler somehow appears to miscalculate the position. There was no knight takes c7, but in fact blunders so badly and like never before. This is what he went for, only to be able to stop the taking on f2. With Beck now arresting this rook, as soon as the bishop fell, there is in fact a winning combo here, but you still need to find it. Can you? It is by no means easy to spot, but it is nevertheless there. Find the next move and you would have at least the entire concept right. Can you play rook a c8? You can, but it is not what we are looking for. Can you go for this attack on the rook? Sure you can, but again, this is not what works most efficiently. Can you go for this rook move to b8? It looks okay, but there is something much stronger than this. Check this one out, and if you disagree, wait to see the full tactic. It is this knight move right into d4. Should the knight depart, it is all about this move, which is going to reward you with plenty of interest. Take this pawn, and there is of course the removal of the knight too. One better than that would defo be this rook repositioning, because what is stopping rook e1? There are two ways to do it, but none of them is going to help. One is this queen move into f3, and two is queen g1. After queen g1, attack the queen, return the bishop to cover, but with everything tied up, this knight on d5 cannot be touched. Take him, and you will get auto-checkmated on g7. Therefore, before going for this push to g5 is an absolute must. Even if this knight backs off to safety, take the pawn with the queen, and the absolute best, which does not do much, would be this takes with a check. When the rook comes off, after this check is in place, king g8, and now this rook on e1 can be picked up, but the big problem you are facing has to be this pin that follows. And this is the end of this variation, with black gaining an unforgiving lead. We need to return to this position in the game, because Beck messed up, and messed up big time. Having this unique combo, not only he missed it, but his entire position collapsed due to a small tiny miscalculation. What was it? This is what he did, only to try and hold onto this pawn on b7. In the meantime, having gone for this knight move, led to Traxler to remove this pawn on c7, Beck in turn attacks the knight, but one important variation he overlooked or missed entirely, was this attack on the queen. With the queen running for her life, Traxler took with a check, the king barely avoids the mate, but as soon as this blast appeared, a mate was already bagged. Beck must have seen something to stop the mate, and indeed came up with the only move that appears to save the situation. He got the knight to jump into the 7th, and finally manages to block the access into h8. Can you help Traxler finish off, and can you spot what to do next? And again, this is where you need to sit down and get your head to work. There is a mate somewhere, but where is it? Traxler never needed any help to make an end to this game. He came in with this check, the knight got rid of the rook, and now via this beautiful response, what a way to finish off another beautiful and exciting encounter. And this is what chess is all about. We hardly get to see this line of play in the modern Petrov, and yet though this game could have gone in either direction, Traxler was the one to come out victoriously in the end. Is there anything we learned today? Well, the basic concept is as follows. Both players committed to multiple inaccuracies, but when push came to shove, Beck was simply unable to deliver. If only he found that knight sacrifice on d4, he would have hit this one right out of the park. It wasn't to be, but anyhow, this was yet another complex and beautiful game with both Traxler and Beck sharing the pole position. And this was another classic featuring the modern variation of the Petrov, and one we had not covered before. We sincerely hope you have enjoyed, and look forward to seeing you again shortly. God bless.